This is Blackjacked, a podcast about how the civil rights movement went left.
Oh man, I gotta get up. I gotta go. I gotta go. I gotta go. I gotta go. I gotta get up and go. I gotta go. I gotta go. I gotta get up and go. I gotta get up and leave.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Blackjack Podcast. Dr. King ultimately was a greater win for white people than black people. White people needed Dr. King way more than black people did. In the final analysis, I want you to consider the thought that perhaps Dr. King did more for white people than he did for black people. And that sounds scandalous, but stay open. Just follow me for a second. White people need this figure because in the ultimate sense, Dr. King helps to maintain the order rather than overturning the order. Put it like this. Imagine that someone is threatening your life, someone is threatening your family, and you're afraid because you know there's a legitimate threat. And so you want to protect yourself. You want to protect your family. You buy a gun. You don't know how to shoot a gun. And so you go to a gun range and you have an instructor. You line up a target. The target is maybe 15 feet in front of you, 20 feet in front of you. And you need to shoot to try to neutralize this threat. And let's say that instructor, rather than showing you how to aim for someone's head or the chest, you aim for the shoulder. Like the instructor shows you how to take your gun and aim it toward the shoulder. Now, that's going in the right direction for sure. That will have an impact for sure. It just may not get you to your ultimate goal, which is to neutralize and take out that enemy who is threatening you and your family. In the same way, when you look at the history of descendants of slaves in America, you come to this country against your will in chains. We fight a civil war that sort of gives you a moment of reprieve. And then that kind of gets undone after the Reconstruction era. You reinstitute slavery. And what we're looking for ultimately is freedom. We're looking for liberation. And in that context, a leader emerges that shows you not how to really get to liberation, but for the most part, integration. We talked about this in episode 1. We sort of want to just feel better. We've been beaten down and we want to do things that sort of mitigate degradation. We talked about this in episode 1. And again, in 2024, we have to be considerate of that. That is a real thing. The things that they endure, the things that they're living under, we cannot imagine. And so, yes, that was actually a big deal for them. But again, it's aiming at the shoulder. And so you have to really consider, why is it that Dr. King is the instructor at the range? To this day, black people, by and large, look to Dr. King for his wisdom, for his insight. And if it doesn't line up with Dr. King's thought, it's sort of dismissed and excused. I grew up in a very religious home. My dad's a preacher. My folks are classic Pentecostals. And if there's ever anything in doubt, we're going to go to the Bible. What does the Bible say? And that settles it. And it's interesting to me as I grew up and even now, black people and even white people to a very large degree in this country, we treat Dr. King the same as the Bible. If Dr. King said it, that settles it. If Dr. King said it, that's the end of it. We quote Dr. King as if he is a biblical source, as if this man is inerrant. And you have to wonder, how did he become the gun range instructor to teach all black people how to aim and target our movement, target our ideals? Well, is it because he just had a much larger audience with black people? Remember, Dr. King, at the height of his powers, he's at the March on Washington talking to 250,000 people. Not a lot of people in history can say 250,000 people showed up to hear me. I mean, that's pretty impressive, right? Not really. 250,000 people came to the Washington Mall to hear not just Dr. King, but it was the NAACP, the Urban League. And by the way, Dr. King didn't pay for that. I believe the Urban League foot most of the bill for the March on Washington. It was a collection of organizations. And yes, the Kennedy administration was very involved backing that. So it took all that to get 250,000 people. Now, the 250,000 people included everyone. There were some white people, not as many as people think, but there were some white people. There were black women. There were black children, black men. Well, Louis Farrakhan by himself got 1 million men, not women, not white people, 1 million black men. So why isn't Louis Farrakhan looked at as an authoritative source? Why don't we revere Louis Farrakhan if it's just about the crowd size? Does it make sense? Well, could it be because, Dr. King was such a revolutionary in the sense that, he got a lot of bills passed, Civil Rights Act of 64, 65, he really helped push those. Well, there was also a Civil Rights Act of 1957, and there was a Civil Rights Act of 1960. The Civil Rights Act of 1957, Dwight Eisenhower got behind it. Essentially, they wanted to help black people access the vote. And so Roy Wilkins, who was the head of the NAACP, they get involved. They introduce this bill, and that bill ultimately passes Congress. Now, it got watered down a whole bunch because, like, there's so many racists in Congress that just were like, no. And so they had to water down that bill to get it passed. So there was a lot of weaknesses with it, but it started the thing off. Now, because it had so many weaknesses, they had to pass another one, the Civil Rights Act of 1960, to try to address those weaknesses. Again, this is the NAACP. This is Roy Wilkins. That bill passes. And by the way, the Civil Rights Act of 1965, we call it the Voting Rights Act. The reason why that has substance and has a pathway is because of the Civil Rights Act of 1960. What it did is it required people to start documenting what was happening in these voting places. And so black people could go back and say, let's look at the documentation, what happened. We can see clearly the evidence of racism, the evidence of discrimination, and that's what gets it across the. So the Civil Rights Act of 1957 and 1960 is nothing to sneeze at. Why aren't we elevating Roy Wilkins? Like, if it's just about passing legislation, we should be hyping up Roy Wilkins, right? And in fact, in 1950, Roy Wilkins and A. Philip Randolph, along with another guy, Arnold Aronson. A. Philip Randolph, of course, he's the founder of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. Arnold Aronson, he was the leader of the National Jewish Community Relations Advisory Council. Anyway, these three, they come together and they founded the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights. The Leadership Conference on Civil Rights, it became the premier civil rights coalition, and they basically coordinated the legislative campaigns for every major civil rights law since 1957. So why aren't we elevating A. Philip Randolph and Roy Wilkins? Again, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Let me be clear, because people get real defensive. We admire Dr. King. He is someone to respect and look. He has a lot of great things to say. I'm just asking the question, what makes him beyond everyone else? Why is he like a canonical figure that, his words are inerrant and not everyone else? Why is he the gold standard and not everyone else? Where does that come from? Where do we get that idea? I'm challenging that part. I'm asking us to think critically. Why is that? Every campaign that King is involved in, he didn't start. We talked about the Montgomery bus boycott in episode 7, I believe. This is a movement started by black women. King was just sort of put into it. Now, he served as a brilliant spokesperson, a very inspirational figure to keep people going and keep people moving. And, that was huge. Again, this is not, we're not taking shots at Dr. King. But what ultimately wins that case, we talked about it, was the NAACP and their attorneys in court. They bring this all the way to the Supreme Court. That's what wins the day. Why aren't we hyping up the NAACP? And in fact, the Montgomery movement depended on the NAACP's financial support. They didn't have any money. The NAACP funded a lot of that. They needed the NAACP. Dr. King never started a campaign. He joined already existing movements. And when he did that, yes, he brings cameras, he amplifies it, he helps raise money. Those are important things. But his record is certainly mixed. In 1961, he jumps into the Albany fight, Albany, Georgia. They lose. We can think about, right as we're trying to get the Civil Rights Act passed, he's down in Florida, in St. Augustine. That campaign, there's not a clear win there either. Birmingham in 63, yeah, it was a tough one. It was like, it wasn't looking that good, even with Dr. King and everything. At the last minute, they kind of pull it out. Okay, they got some concessions made. Selma, that works out ultimately. You get the point. I'm just saying, it's not like it's a guarantee that when Dr. King comes, it's over. No, it's a pretty mixed bag. But these are movements on the ground that already exist through local leadership, and he's just helping to amplify. But again, in Dr. King's lifetime, his leadership was not universally accepted. We know white people didn't like him. We have all the polling, right? So we have Gallup polls as he's coming to prominence, the March on Washington, even into 1963. We have polling that says, okay, how do we feel about this? And overwhelmingly, white people are like, no. But overwhelmingly, black people are like, yes. I mean, you can look up Gallup polling at that time. But what's interesting is, as America becomes more acquainted with Dr. King, so he comes to prominence 1956, the Montgomery bus boycott. 1957, he really blows up. He starts writing books, etc. 1963, Birmingham campaign, etc. 1966, Gallup follows up and does some more polling. His favorable ratings actually decrease. As people know more about him, they like him less. He's down to 33%. Okay, now again, if you parse out black and white, it's still very different. White people overwhelmingly no, black people overwhelmingly yes. But just because he has a favorable rating with black people, again, Whitney Young didn't have a favorable rating. He was the head of the Urban League. Roy Wilkins, the head of the NAACP. James Farmer, the head of CORE. Black people like them too. So again, I'm asking, how does he get elevated here? And the answer is very simple. Black people have always always had this thing where we really seek white validation. To this day, if we are really honest, we don't jump onto something unless white people first endorse it. Get out of your feelings. Don't get defensive. Let's really think critically. When black people do something, we really need white people to say, yeah, that's cool. Why do we use Instagram and TikTok versus Fanbase, an app made by a black man? Well, white people haven't endorsed it. Why did everyone get excited about Barack Obama after he won the Iowa caucus? Because white people say, yeah, he's cool. And then everyone jumped on Obama. If you really go back and look at polling, black people were not jumping on Obama before Iowa. We didn't know who he was. White people said yes, and then we say yes. Dr. King was one of the rare black leaders who got white people's endorsement. It starts with the Montgomery bus boycott. He becomes this media sensation. In 1957, he appears on the cover of Time magazine, and that changes everything. He is a star. I mean, that's the equivalent of his day of going super viral and staying viral. Time magazine was a big deal, and you just didn't have black people on the cover. There are some exceptions. So in 1930, Haile Selassie of Ethiopia, he's on the cover, but okay, this is some guy in Ethiopia, sure. You do get sports figures. So you have Jackie Robinson in 1950 who's on the cover, but that's sports. Kwame Nkrumah, 1953, again, an African leader somewhere else. You have Thurgood Marshall in 1955. Now, with that white validation, Thurgood Marshall, who's an attorney, he reaches the highest heights that you can get to in his profession, the Supreme Court. This endorsement matters. Thurgood Marshall did get white endorsement, and it takes him to the Supreme Court. And then in 1957, in February, Dr. King gets that same thing. Once the white media buy into King, now let me be clear, he was not universally loved by the white media. That's not what I'm suggesting at all. But he's at least given a chance. He's at least spotlighted in a way that's not completely vicious. So generally when the white press covers black folks, it don't go well. They don't write anything positive about Paul Robeson, right? They don't write anything positive about Marcus Garvey. That's just not how that works. And so you have this black leader who is speaking out, who is articulate, and he looks the part, and the white media endorses him. That really helps black people begin to buy into this on a big level. And then you carry this all the way out. After he's assassinated, there's this campaign to get a national holiday for him. Now, there's no campaign to get national holidays for any of these other people, but he's this media figure through his life that there's at least a chance, and he's accepted by at least a certain portion of the white establishment. Now, towards the end of his life, that starts to change because, again, remember, we talk about episode 5, he speaks out against Vietnam. That doesn't go well. He gets on this economic kick, the Poor People's Campaign. We talk about the Poor People's Campaign in episode 11. That doesn't go well. And so really his image has to sort of be sanitized even from that. He's the most acceptable of black leaders to white people, but we have to still sanitize him a little bit more to get a national holiday. And that happens. And so you downplay some of his more radical rhetoric. You downplay some of that economic focus, and it becomes holding hands and we shall overcome and I have a dream. And then eventually Ronald Reagan says, okay, I guess we can do this. That's how you get there. And so you have this elevation that in some ways is artificial. It's not that he was so much more revered by black people. It's not that more black people followed this person. It's not that this person is more right than the next person. He's just the most acceptable and sanitized and the one embraced by the white press and the white establishment for a period of time long enough for us to register him in our consciousness, and that we can go ahead and get this holiday moving. But we still need to do a little sanitation even for that. And so if you look at Dr. King's life's work, what we really remember is what? Integration. But even Dr. King himself was like, I don't know if that was the right move. Harry Belafonte was a really good friend of Dr. King. And Harry Belafonte talks about this account in the height of the movement. Dr. King comes to his apartment and he's wrestling with some things. And he says this. This is Dr. King speaking, according to Harry Belafonte. And I quote, I've come upon something that disturbs me deeply. We have fought hard and long for integration, as I believe we should have, and I know we will win. But I have come to believe that we are integrating into a burning house. I'm afraid that America has lost the moral vision she may have had. And I'm afraid that even as we integrate, we are walking into a place that does not understand that this nation needs to be deeply concerned with the plight of the poor and disenfranchised. Until we commit ourselves to ensuring that the underclass is given justice and opportunity, we will continue to perpetuate the anger and violence that tears the soul of this nation. I fear I am integrating my people into a burning house. This is Dr. King saying we can integrate all we want to, but this game is rigged. We don't have a shot. And so the people around Dr. King, other leaders, we talk about this in episode 6, Elijah Muhammad, he has this economic plan to say, okay, I know this nation is racist. I know you won't accept us. We need to accept ourselves and love ourselves enough to build on our own. We need to establish strong black institutions that we control and that can protect us and help us survive. The function of Dr. King ultimately is to inundate you with this thinking, his thoughts, at least the thoughts that they want you to know about Dr. King, because that's not all of Dr. King. There are other things. But let's pump you up with that from the time that you're in kindergarten till you get to college, so that by the time you hear an Elijah Muhammad, he sounds crazy to you. By the time you hear Marcus Garvey, he sounds nuts. By the time that you hear all these other black voices who are saying what is most important is not sitting next to you. When you hear black voices saying, you know what? You've done me wrong and you owe me justice. That sounds nuts. The only voices that are allowed are the voices who say we should forgive and turn the other cheek. We shouldn't be angry with white folks. You elevate those quotes from Dr. King. Now, again, there are others. Dr. King does talk about reparation. Yes, he does. He talks about what the Negroes owe, but even that has to sort of be muted. But the people who are saying, my job is not to forgive you, not at all. The people who say, I'm going to use that black anger to fuel me to build and progress. If you're inundated all day long with forgiveness, turn the other cheek, let's hold hands, and let's sit at a lunch counter and pass our money and make you rich, by the time somebody comes and says, whoa, why don't I own the lunch counter? And why am I making you rich if you hate me this much? Those people sound so foreign and so crazy, you automatically reject it and you won't hear it. And so even with this podcast, most of the things that I talk about week to week, yes, they sound a little crazy to you because we've been so indoctrinated. We've been given this gun range instructor who, yes, they're aiming towards the right direction. Yes, they're not aiming backward. I mean, they're kind of in the right direction. But if you don't hit that target, you haven't taken out that enemy and neutralized them, and your family's really not safe. You may slow them down a little bit. You may feel better because you got a lick in. You might feel like you're doing something because you're holding the gun and that feels empowering. But are you actually keeping your family safe and taking that enemy out? And that is the function of Dr. King. Yes, he's great. Yes, he's brilliant. But if you're not aiming at the head, ultimately, you're helping the enemy more than you're helping me. It's a tough thought, but it's one that I want you to consider and look at today. Are we really aiming at the head? Are we still following the instructions of an instructor who's telling us to hit the shoulder? And who are the leaders that we're elevating in our consciousness? Are they the leaders that white people have approved, that the white media has endorsed? Or are they truly the leaders that are saying the things that we need to hear and that we can get behind towards real liberation?
I gotta go. I gotta get up and go. I gotta go. I gotta go. I gotta get up and go. I gotta get up and leave. I gotta get up and go. I gotta go. I gotta get up and go. They waiting on me when I walk out the door. They counting on me to get ready to blow. Too many people saying that I'm the hero. Too many people looking up to me. Can't let them down, not an option for me. Don't even matter if you rocking with me. I touch down even if you ain't blocking for me. No BS and no negativity. Only dealing with positive energy. Yeah, it's haters and doubters surrounding me. I don't pay them no man, they ain't stopping me. Like Brady and Jordan, no topping me. I'm MVP in every category. My confidence grows every day that I rise. Gotta get up and go, keep my eye on the prize. I gotta go, manifesting all my hopes and dreams. I gotta go, yo, I'm strategizing like I'm coaching the team. I got places to go, I got people to see, I got things to do. Yo, I'm through with surviving, it's time to start living, I don't know about you. That's what I see for myself, speak over my life, I got riches and wealth. Take it in stride one day at a time, no malice inside, I'm nothing but blessed.